Okay, today is topic 1.7, the relationship between the states and the federal government. And so when we're talking about that, ultimately what we're discussing is federalism, okay? And federalism is the idea, and I know that I put down one particular definition here, but what I would say is the division of power amongst the federal government and regional governments known as states. So it's that division of powers of federal government powers, state government powers, and powers that they share in between. Now, believe it or not, this topic has been the most controversial in our nation's history and continues to be because it comes down to one basic issue, which is this idea of who's got the power. Is this a national government power? Is it a federal government power? Or is it a shared government power? And you're going to notice that as we begin discussing tomorrow, and more importantly, tomorrow, that states or even the federal government become very resentful when one party oversteps their bounds and jumps into their arena or their powers or so on as well. But we'll get to that tomorrow. Now, there's different types of federalism, different types of working relationships, if you will. We have dual federalism, where the states and the federal government are against each other. Think of them, they're almost in a gun duel. They don't like each other, they're completely separated. This is a format that favors states' rights. So the federal government, you have your powers, we have ours. There's no meet in the middle, there's no shared powers. We're against each other. Then you have cooperative powers, all right, where the federal government and the states cooperate together on certain issues to tackle large scale ideas like poverty. Okay? Coercive is kind of a heavy handed situation where the federal government is acting like a stern parent to a child, whereas they're saying, you will do the following job or else. And we usually see a lot of mandates, a lot of threats involved in this type of federalism. So they're trying to coerce the states into doing their bidding. And then we have the new form of federalism that we've seen recently within the 1990s and even today, which is this idea of devolution, which is the federal government passing off responsibility to the states. So it was once our job, now it's yours. A little bit of specialized vocabulary because you're talking about powers when you're talking about federalism. So we have express powers, federal government powers only, concurrent powers, powers that they both share, that they being the federal government and state governments, reserve powers, powers that only the state governments have. Now, some things that are not in this Venn diagram. Implied powers, all right, which down here it says to make laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying out the enumerated powers. All right, that's an allusion to an implied power. So they're talking about that in order for us to carry out our duties in the Constitution, we might need to take on different powers or roles or responsibilities that are not listed originally. So even though it's not stated in the Constitution, it's implied. Now, inherent powers are also not going to be on this Venn diagram as well too, but they belong to the federal government, and it's basically going to deal with foreign policy. All right. So when you're talking about inherent power, you're usually talking about, and it's usually kind of synonymous with acquiring territory. So inherent powers are adding new territories to the United States. Regulating immigration is also another classic example of an inherent power, right? Because you are a state, and by state I mean you are a nation that is respected by others. You have those rights to define your territory and protect your borders and so on as well. So those are there as well. Other specialized vocabulary are going to be the 10th Amendment, which basically kind of says, hey, if it's not listed in the Constitution, the topic or the scenario, and there's a lot that is not, then it is automatically going to fall to the states as well. So those are some specialized vocabulary that you got to be comfortable with. Now I'll leave you to kind of pause this video if you want to take a look at the various different expressed or enumerated powers, concurrent powers, or reserved powers as well too, so that you can kind of take a look at who's responsible for what. Now, federalism is the cornerstone to our government. We are not a unitary government where we have one specific unit. There's not one circle here. There's two. All right. Now, what I would also say though with the federalism is this: you've got an extremely difficult balancing act, and what I mean by that is this: both the federal government and the state governments do not like the other intervening on their behalf, on their discretion. So the state governments do not like it when the federal government comes over and says, hey, do this, when it's not their job. And the same thing, The federal government resents facts when the state government does things that are in their domain over here. So the federal government is giving a specific, I mean, in the Constitution it says that they have to protect fundamental rights or provide for the general welfare. And a lot of those powers in order to do that are in Article 1, Section 8, which some are listed here. All right. So these are federal government powers that should belong to the federal government according to the framers of the Constitution. Now, we also have a strong history of limited government too. And whereas we just don't want a federal government dominating over us and telling us exactly what to do, we already had that. We don't want that. So we want the states to maintain their autonomy, allow them to have specific jobs too and powers that they hold as well. And then also this ability to share some of these powers too. So we kind of talked about this already, but once again, in the Constitutional Convention, when they're dividing up power, there's certain powers that they say, hey, listen, as much as we might try, these powers alone have to belong to the federal government. We listed them up there. And then, but more importantly, listen, we don't want the federal government to dominate all facets of life. We need to have a limited government model, and we need to also have the states to play a major role too. So, listen, let's live up to the Ninth Amendment that says there's more rights that are afforded to people that are in the Constitution. And also, if those rights or any rights are not mentioned in the Constitution, they fall to the states. So the states are also going to play a major role here too, moving forward. Now, listen, there's always this process is wonderful as it is been far from problem free. And so here's what I'm going to say here. Listen, you have inconsistencies or did with some certain states in regards to civil liberties. So notice here, it says here in state reserve powers that they're able to establish and maintain schools or regulate intrastate commerce. That means commerce inside the state. Even before the 1960s, some southern states decided, what we're going to do with our schools? We're going to segregate them. Okay, we're not going to allow white and African American children to learn in the same schools. We're going to divide them. And what we're also going to do is bar African Americans from entering certain public restaurants and make them pick up their orders in the back or sit in the back of the bus or sit in the upper balcony, if you will, watching a movie theater, separating the races. And as far as local governments go, we're going to pass laws like grandfather clauses and literacy tests, so on as well, to prevent African Americans from voting. So sometimes the federal government has had to intervene on that behalf to make sure that state governments are living up to the civil liberties that are stated in the Constitution. And best believe that the southern states were not very excited about that. They're very resentful about that as well too. And another thing you're going to find out is there's large-scale problems like poverty or economic stagnation, where your state's economy starts to go flat. And states don't have the resources to combat those ideas or combat those topics as well. All right? So sometimes they might need the federal government, or the federal government might think that they need to intervene on behalf to help out with issues of poverty or pick back up one's economic condition as well. And we saw that with the New Deal. Once again, a lot of resent going to that as well. But sometimes you're going to notice that the federal government will be mean or nice. And if they're going to be mean, and I'm going to explain this a lot more tomorrow, what they're going to be doing is saying, states, you must do this. We are telling you, you must do this. And we're mandating that you do this. Okay? And if you don't do this, we're going to either cut funding or we're going to prosecute the public officials that are elected to carry out this job. And sometimes you'll notice they'll be nice, which is they want to intervene over here and they'll say, okay, we would like you to do the following. If you do, we'll give you money to do so. But if you accept this money, we're going to give you, some rules to follow. But there's more on that tomorrow as well. And so moving on. But it still doesn't stop. We still have issues at play. All right? Like, whose job is it? So welfare reform, classic example. Is it your job, federal government, or is it the state's job? I thought it was your job. No, I'm turning it over to you. But what do you want us to do? Well, you should do these things, but you're not clearly defining them. But you should do these things as well. Ultimately, what they're doing here with modern welfare, and we'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow, is treating the states like laboratory experiments and figure out which one does best and moving from there. Now, also, legalization of marijuana. It's illegal. No, it's legal. No, it's illegal. No, it's legal. I said it's illegal. Nope, I'm saying it's legal. Now stop me from doing so. It's a classic everyday situation as well. And then even today, when you're talking about the coronavirus response. If you're watching the press conferences or you're reading news stories about it, you're going to notice that the federal government has certain responsibilities that they must conduct during this crisis, and the states are too. But you're also noticing bickering going back and forth, where state governments and certain governors are saying, federal government, you're not doing enough. We need more respirators. We need more personal protective equipment. We just need more. And then you also see the federal government popping back of, that's not our job. That's your job. You need to take care of that. No, we need help. You should be taking care of this as well. So you're going to see state governments resentful of the federal government not chipping in as much as they would want. And you're also going to see the federal government clapping back at the states, if you will. Clapping back, if you will. And states like, hey, listen, you need to be quiet. This is not our job, your job. We're going to help out as much as we can. But listen, pay attention, because those things are at play right here. What they're discussing is federalism. So as we move forward, I've posted 2 assignments for you to complete. The Unit 1 progress checks, the multiple choice progress check, and then the FRQ progress check. Check Google Classroom, because I have posted a certain way that I want you to do the FRQ to make it much, much more easier to grade. And there's going to be 96 different FRQs that I have to grade. So any help in that would be great. All right. Well, tomorrow we're going to finish up with Unit 1. We'll finish up with federalism. As always, I miss you. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, always feel free to email me. But other than that, see you tomorrow.